I really appreciate the invitation to be with you. It's a great honor. I titled my comments tonight, 40 Years Post-Stonewall, Which Way the Movement? Those of us who have worked in or closely with the movement for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender equality are aware of the very interesting times that we live in. The challenge of advancing a state-by-state strategy as well as a federal strategy with the current pressures for some victories for LGBT equality, especially in light of the massive setback that we had in California in November of 2008. And at the outset, I have to say and share that I am among those who view the use of the word movement for our activities with some skepticism. In reality, the LGBT communities, the plural there is intended, have a collection of large and smaller organizations, national, each going about their mission and their work, coordinating, sharing, and supporting each other for the most part, which I'm told was not always the case historically. But there's really not this fully integrated and shared strategy when it comes to advancing equality. Has there ever been? We have 4 large national organizations. For those of you who may not be familiar with it, I like to take these opportunities to educate those of you who may not. We have the Human Rights Campaign, which is our largest organization, doing the lion's share of federal political and public policy advancement. The second largest organization is Lambda Legal, that handles all of the many legal cases working their way through the judicial process. GLAAD is the third largest, engaged in the media advocacy and anti-defamation work, only an IRS 501c3 and therefore not involved with the politics or lobbying. And the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, which is actually the oldest national organization and is the local community organizer organization for the overall movement. Beyond those 4 organizations, and it should be noted that Lambda, GLAAD, and the task force combined don't equal the size or the annual budget of the Human Rights Campaign, you have many organizations working within a special interest area, some of which work on Don't Ask, Don't Tell with the Service Members Legal Defense Network, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, the Family Equality Council, the Victory Fund, the Equality Federation, and on and on. There are many organizations all doing good work, but often doing their work in their own place, not necessarily coordinated with so much of the other good work that is taking place. Here's something that's very interesting. Our movement has about 500 full-time employees in 28 or 29 national organizations. Another 575 people are on the boards of directors of all those different organizations, raising funds and setting policy and direction for those groups. So think about it. Even though there are another 50 or so folks who are working in statewide organizations around the country, what we see and hear about the quest for full equality every day around this country for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people is really being generated by a group of about 1,200 or so professional and volunteer people, supported by a lot of others, of course. But if you think about it, there's an awful lot of visibility on LGBT issues in our country right now, coming from the work of a very small number of people if you look at it from the large picture. So I'm going to identify and address several topics in the short time we have together. I'm going to touch on the overall state of the movement. I'm going to talk about some specific issues of public policy being discussed and debated, the influence of cultural change enabling policy change, and perhaps most importantly, what thresholds I think still need to be crossed for true equality to become both the law and the culturally accepted way of our society. As I begin, I want to thank those of you who are here tonight as straight allies of the LGBT communities. We cannot achieve full equality without you. And I especially want to thank those of you who do identify and are members of the LGBT communities who have chosen to live openly. As we know from the research, some of which I'll share in a moment, your willingness to be open and no longer invisible is what is changing hearts and minds. Now, like some of you perhaps, I had no idea the impact my decision to live openly would have on other people. I was just doing what I needed to do for myself at the time as the mayor of Tempe, Arizona, politically and otherwise. But I was wrong. One evening after I had been open about my sexual orientation for a few years and re-elected, I received a phone call about 10 p.m. The voice on the other end of the phone was quite agitated. It's really the norm when someone's calling the mayor at night. But this was no normal constituent call. The caller said, "My wife and I voted for you in every election." Always a good sign at the start of the call. "We know you're gay. We heard you've talked to gay groups around time, and we just didn't know who else to call. Our 17-year-old son just told us he is gay." We reacted terribly. Actually, we were more hurt that he didn't trust us sooner. He got angry. He ran out of the house. We don't want to call the police. We're not homophobic, but we don't know anyone who is gay, and we don't know what to do. Does he have his cell phone with him, I asked. Yes, he always has it with him. Call him. Tell him that you're sorry you overreacted. Tell him that you love him and that you want him to come home and that he can always come home. And I gave them the number of the local PFLAG group, encouraged them to call, and I asked them to let me know how things worked out. When we think today of our push for full equality in 2009, as impatient and frustrating and just wrong as the current inequality is, I find it helpful, especially with audiences on college campuses, to help frame our advancement and provide some perspective. Watch this clip.
What about the doorbell?
I'll fix it later. Unless the interior decorator here would like to do it.
I'm not an interior decorator.
I know, I thought all you fellas were.
What fellas?
You know, Tinkerbell. Yeah, Patty, Maxine, and Tinkerbell. Yeah, but it's okay now. I told her all about Jack.
What'd you tell her?
Oh, just a little fairy story.
Well, that clip is from one of the top-rated shows, as I mentioned, Three's Company, from 1977, 32 years ago, not that long after Stonewall. And the show was a reflection of the common views about gay men, if they were to be vocalized at all. I was 20, living in Arizona, knew that I was gay, but knew I didn't want to be laughed at. And so I hid my own true identity for many years. Our society had yet to get to know gay people beyond the stereotypes. We had yet to come out of the shadows in any great numbers, outside of urban areas especially. Our representation in all forms of media, be it TV, film, or news coverage, was essentially what you saw in that clip. Other people, usually men, making fun of and light of the fairies and such. But we can watch that today and without hesitation acknowledge that the culture in our society with regard to people who are gay has transformed immensely the last 40 years since Stonewall. And it is this great divide, actually, between where the culture is today in 2009 versus 69 and where public policy toward the gay communities are today causes a lot of frustration. And yet it motivates and compels us to do our work each and every day. So where is our movement today, and which way is it heading? From the 30,000-foot level, we've had some court victories. Remember Lawrence and Goodridge. We've had some legislative victories, Connecticut, California. We won at the ballot box in Arizona in 2006, only to have it reversed in 2008. Of course, we know what happened in California in 2008. We've lost in courts in Washington and New York. We've won in some others. And we know that we've lost in legislatures where anti-gay legislation and issues on topics ranging from adoption to you name it, with regard to LGBT issues, anti-gay laws have been passed all over the place. In some cases sent to the voters where they have passed, almost always when they go to the voters. What's important to remember, though, is that all of this has played out, whether it be in courts or legislatures, and it's going to continue to happen this way, winning some, losing others. Public opinion has actually shifted dramatically in favor of issues of vital importance to LGBT people. I think we have a good shot of winning the campaign to retain marriage in the state of Maine, coming up in a few weeks in November. And I'm hopeful there that the leaders have learned from the mistakes that were made in California and are running a winning campaign, and I hear good things about the campaign. There are two other notable ballot initiatives this fall: the state of Washington, Referendum 71, would strip away several recent provisions that have been added to the state's domestic partnership law. And in Kalamazoo, Michigan, there's a local domestic partnership registry being voted on by the residents of Kalamazoo. So you see, our issues are going to continue to be dealt with in the public domain on a local level, on a state level, and yes, on all levels of our society, with legal and public policy victories and defeats, subject to the legal maneuverings, political campaigns run well or run poorly, and all that such will bring. We have to be honest, and we have to acknowledge that the real significant advancements for LGBT equality thus far have come not at the federal level, but at the state and local level. Tony Broadus of the Equality Federation stated well recently that over the last 3 decades, hundreds of laws and ordinances have been passed at the local and state level, with none at the federal level that would make it illegal to discriminate against LGBT people. Today, only in 21 states and the District of Columbia are LGBT people protected from employment discrimination. Only 21 of our United States. Transgender people have protection in just 13 states and in D.C. It is my belief that the Federal Employment Non-Discrimination Act will be passed by Congress, and it will be signed by President Obama in his first term, although I'm not hopeful it will be in the current or next Congress, but probably early in 2011. That's just a political reality coming from where I sit. And we have to remember, even when ENDA is the law of the land, and it will be one day, many LGBT people will still need those state laws as their protection because ENDA is not going to apply to most small businesses. So using employment non-discrimination as an example, let's look at the public policy, the legal and cultural ways we're advancing. As I mentioned, for many years now, cities and towns have been passing local ordinances making it unlawful for their government entities to discriminate on the basis of sexual orientation. And more have now included gender identity as well. Those local ordinances gave rise to efforts successful in the 21 states where state government officials are now doing the same with regard to protecting employees. And all the while that was taking place, it was actually the corporate world that led the way. It was the corporate world that put in place the non-discrimination policies and showed government that it was not only the right thing to do, it was the smart thing to do from an employee attraction and retention standpoint as well. So when ENDA is passed and signed, it will not be because Congress is leading on this basic human rights issue. It will be because they are following the lead of corporate, state, and local entities which have already made such the best and common practice. Indeed, most members of Congress are far behind not just these other jurisdictions, they remain far behind where the American people are on this issue. In Gallup's Values and Beliefs poll of May 2006, 89% of Americans supported equality in employment opportunities for LGBT people. 89%. And for those who say, well, now the grassroots activists are awakened and they're coming out now to show up and get involved as a result of Prop 8 passing in California, I have to say that's not really so. It has been the grassroots activists, by and large, who work to pass those hundreds of local and state ordinances and whose visibility changed the culture in their communities toward their LGBT family, friends, and neighbors. Let me share where I think we are and where also the American people are from the data we know on a national level. I already talked about ENDA. It's going to be passed. It'll be signed within a couple of years. And I already mentioned a vast majority of Americans support employment non-discrimination. Less are supportive of non-discrimination laws when it comes to housing and public accommodation, although it's still a majority. It's 51% for housing and public accommodation. The Matthew Shepard Act will be passed and will be signed, perhaps as soon as a week from right now. We're in the week that is the 11th anniversary of when Matt was murdered. And Judy Shepard and all the folks from her foundation, folks working on a federal level from HRC and the task force who've been working on this legislation for a long, long time are going to have a victory, a very well-deserved and important victory very, very soon, I believe. From a Harris Interactive poll conducted again in December of 2008 that was commissioned by GLAAD, we know that more than 6 in 10 U.S. adults favor expanding the existing hate crime laws to include gay and transgender people. That's solid support for that public policy. The policy of don't ask, don't tell. with regard to military service. It will be repealed by Congress. The President is not going to act to remove the policy or make it null in his role as Commander-in-Chief, as so many of my friends and colleagues and activists have called and would hope for him to do. Just don't see that happening. But the Harris poll showed that 64% of U.S. adults favor allowing gay people to serve in our armed forces. It's a matter of time. We will be able to serve openly, and that, I think, will probably happen in the next couple of years, but as I said, through a legislative process and with the commanders and the generals on board with it rather than by any kind of an executive order. The 1996 Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA, is not going to be repealed in Obama's first term, and I'll be honest with you and tell you that I don't think it'll be repealed in his second term, should he have one. There are now 30 states that have voter-approved constitutional bans on gay marriage. It's not very likely that the members of Congress from all of those states are going to be voting for or leading the charge to repeal DOMA. So we have to have another strategy. We have to continue working in the states, and we have to have other state legislatures involved coming around, because too many state legislatures have also passed bans on gay marriage, even when it wasn't sent to their voters to vote on a constitutional amendment. There are just 6 states that have approved marriage for gay and lesbian couples: Iowa, Vermont, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. Maine voters will decide whether they retain marriage or not on November 3rd, and marriage in New Hampshire will be legal as of January 1st, 2010. Let me make a point right here and thank and acknowledge President Clinton, who just in the last week or so acknowledged his support for full equality of marriage on a state level. That means a lot, and we welcome him standing with us in favor of marriage equality. There's widespread speculation that the New Jersey legislature will pass marriage equality following their election, November 3rd, and before January in their what they call lame duck session. And recent reports indicate, though, that the issue is not likely to come up in the state of New York in 2009 or possibly even in 2010 early. There remains a lot of mixed opinion with regard to marriage in our country, but the truth is the culture is rapidly shifting in favor of equality, even as we saw marriage rights taken away by voters in California. I know it's hard to say that, but the culture is shifting in favor. The Harris poll reported 75% of U.S. adults believe there should be marriage or domestic partnerships or civil unions for gay and lesbian couples. Only 22% of U.S. adults today believe there should be no recognition at all. And the split between with regard to allowing legal marriage is 47% for marriage, 49% opposed. That's pretty close. Now, there could be a breakthrough case on a federal level. There are a couple of very high-profile, successful attorneys, one from the right, one from the left, who have filed a case involving the legal status of marriage in California. And that case could be heard by the Supreme Court someday. It's hard to tell. But there's certainly not unanimous support within our, again, quote, movement with regard to whether that case should even have been advanced at this time. The legal organizations within the LGBT movement are very skeptical of advancing it the way it has been advanced. It's another example, perhaps, of less coordination and collaboration for this movement than many would expect, and yet we welcome everyone trying to help and trying to move us toward full equality. It is what it is at this point. We will watch it unfold with great interest. Will that case be for gay and lesbian Americans what the 1967 Loving versus Virginia ruling was for supporters of interracial marriage? We just don't know. So with all the cultural change and the increasingly supportive attitudes toward gay people and our quest for full equality, what is standing in our way? What are the legal and public policy arenas, and why are they so far behind the changing culture? Because, for the overwhelming most part, that's how social change occurs. As a former elected official, I will tell you, politics rarely leads. Culture leads and then changes the politics, which is why the cultural change work of our movement is so very, very important. It's why I chose to work at GLAAD. It's why we cannot engage in an either-or strategy with regard to advancing on just state levels and local levels or throw it all at the federal level. We have to do both. We have to do it all. Today, on the federal level, when we have more friends in Congress than we've had in modern times towards LGBT issues, and a friend in the White House, We need to be present. We need to be strong. We have to not back down. We have to state clearly that we have waited long enough for full equality. And we have to be persistent because we know that that message is going to be heard, but we also, in being honest with ourselves, know that message is not going to be fully implemented in the time frame that we would like. On the state and local level, we must engage and fight every battle as it comes forth, whether it's Kalamazoo or wherever it is, and we're going to win some and we're going to lose some. But we know, and the other side knows too, our adversaries know too, that time is on our side. The culture continues to shift in favor of equality. We need only look at the surveys of young people, including those who identify as evangelical, to know that their support for gay and lesbian issues will far, far exceed that of their parents and their grandparents, and they will bring us full equality. In 2003, Sandra Day O'Connor said, "Real change, when it comes, stems principally from the attitudinal shifts in the population at large. Rare indeed is the legal victory in court or legislature that is not a careful byproduct of an emerging social consensus." There are 3 thresholds yet to be crossed, in my view, for that emerging social consensus to tilt undeniably in favor of LGBT equality. And the first 2 involve addressing head-on issues that the broader movement for LGBT equality has a tough time handling. The bigotry that is often based in religious beliefs, and the topic of choice when it comes to one's sexual orientation. For religious-based bigotry, it's a very delicate topic. Research shows that even the most progressive people do not like it when one's religious beliefs are attacked or challenged. I don't either. And yet we know that deeply held religious beliefs have been used to justify discrimination and inequality for as long as one can remember. In the 19th century, Southern ministers defended slavery as approved by God, quoting Colossians 3:22, "Slaves, obey in everything those who are your earthly masters." Deeply held religious beliefs were often cited as the reasons for why women should not vote or have a full place in society. A Virginia court defended racial segregation by quoting, "The Almighty God created the races, white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them all on different continents. He did not intend for the races to mix." And it took until, as we know, 1967 for the Supreme Court to reject that thinking when it struck down laws forbidding interracial marriage that remained in 16 states at the time. But in doing so, the court in 1967 had to stand sharply in the face of what was nearly 70% of the American people who at the time still supported laws prohibiting interracial marriage, mostly because of deeply held religious beliefs. Our movement must deal more directly, carefully, with allies in religious and faith communities if we seek to continue the cultural change that will bring us our full equality, and as it relates to using religious beliefs as a way to justify our continued inequality as citizens of this country. Mitchell Gold and his organization, Faith in America, are doing a great job addressing religious-based bigotry and encouraging these very difficult conversations with people of deep religious faith. I started the Religion, Faith, and Values media program at GLAAD a few years ago because this is perhaps the most important area within which to focus our work of changing hearts and minds and solidify the growing support from a demographic which historically has stood in the way of social progress and civil rights for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people. The second issue deals with sexual orientation as a choice. We know for a fact that those who come to understand that gay and lesbian people do not choose their sexual orientation any more than straight people, despite what they may have been taught to believe, are much, much more likely to support our full equality. So why doesn't the movement take on such messaging and help people understand that sexual orientation is not a choice? Mainly because of very far left progressive beliefs and influences within the movement that GLBT people should have the same rights as others without regard to whether sexual orientation is a choice or not. I agree. And while I believe and share the idealism of getting people to support us, based on the high ground of social justice and morality, if I can obtain equality sooner, if I help people understand I did not choose to be gay, I will take it, and I will do so. The third threshold is one we are making some progress, and that is attracting more and more straight allies to stand with us in our quest for full equality, accepting leadership roles within the movement, having equality for LGBT become not just about LGBT people, but about all people. As we were undergoing a branding exercise at GLAAD a year or so ago, I actually suggested we consider dropping the gay and lesbian from our name and just be the Alliance Against Defamation. Well, let's just say that my colleagues didn't share my view on the topic very much, but I still think the focus on making the movement more open to our allies and more available to our allies to stand with us is very critical for more near-term success. I had an amazingly wonderful experience working more than full-time as the president of GLAAD, working every day in advocacy for full equality. Some have said that it will hurt any future political interest because the role placed me in the center of often very difficult and challenging situations, taking an unequivocal stand for LGBT equality. But that's fine by me. I'm a Brubaker guy. Some of you, most of you probably may be too young to remember that film with Robert Redford, but you should rent it if you haven't seen it. In the film, his character as a prison warden states, "You compromise on strategy, not on principle." That's my view. Our culture is changing rapidly with regard to the equality of LGBT Americans. The Harris poll of December 2008 found that just fewer than 20% of U.S. adults claimed that their feelings toward lesbian and gay people had become more favorable in just the last 5 years. That's a big shift within a 5-year period. When asked what factors led to that attitudinal shift, 79% said it was because they know someone who is gay. 50% indicated they knew that laws had been changed to protect gays and lesbians. 41% said that news coverage of gay and lesbian issues was important, and 34% said that seeing gay and lesbian characters in the media, particularly on television, influenced them. LGBT people still not treated equally in our country, and the sad but true reality is we have many battles to fight before we are. But I have hope, because we have left 1977 far behind. Witness what over 12 million people watched one night about a year ago on this top-rated television show.
What's the recovery period for brain surgery?
It varies, but usually at least 4 to 6 weeks.
It looks like you'll be stuck with me for 4 to 6 weeks.
You deploy in 5 days, man.
That was before I knew you had a brain tumor.
No. Don't screw this up for yourself. You're a soldier. It's who you are. Besides, I'm probably not even gonna make it through surgery. Okay? So...
Cool. Then I'll be good to go in about 5 days.
Why did you come?
How could I not? God, you're so paranoid.
Mr. Covington.
Get out. Don't make me throw you out. What's wrong?
Nothing's wrong, sir. Nothing at all. I know my being here makes you feel uncomfortable, but I was trained not to leave a man when he's down. Our man is down.
Todd.
We both love him.
Todd.
No! All I want to know is how he's doing.
I guess I should know better when it comes to falling. Yes,
God.
I should know better.
I want him to have a military burial.
A long way from 1977. I never heard from that Tempe couple that called me that night. But a couple of years ago when I was home in Tempe, a young 20-something guy came up to me in the grocery store and he said, "Hey, are you the mayor?" "Former," I said. And he went on to say, "Yeah, I think my mom and dad called you when they freaked out the night that I came out to them about 7 years ago." I remembered them, and so I asked him if he went home. "Yeah, they called, and I did later on. It was tough at first, but they're very supportive, and we're pretty close." I'm glad he went home. And I told him, "You're lucky they're your parents." And he said, "I know, and they're lucky I'm their son." Absolutely they are. So much is happening, so much will continue to happen in our movement for LGBT equality. We have to stand together, straight allies within our communities, and do everything we can for every battle that comes forward to make the public policy reality and have our public policy equal the cultural change that is taking place in our country. I thank you very, very much for having me here tonight, and I look forward to our dialogue during a question and answer period. So thank you.
Now going to open it up to questions. If you would, please raise your hand and wait for me to recognize you, and then we'll get a mic to you so everyone can hear. Already have one?
I recently read that in Arizona, because of the budget shortfalls, that the governor did away with the health benefits for state employees. If you were to become governor, or if/when, would you reinstate those benefits?
Sure, with an executive order. What the governor actually did, though, she signed the bill that the legislature passed. She didn't do that all by herself. The very Republican right-wing legislature in Arizona passed legislation that did that, and she signed it. But yeah, that needs to be changed, and it will someday.
Wanted to find out your thoughts about changing parties and how that affected being out, if that factored into your changing parties.
Sure. It's interesting because when it's elected on the local level in Arizona, you run nonpartisan. So I was a registered Republican, although every time I was elected mayor, I actually beat another registered Republican. It's a pretty Republican area. For me, finally leaving the Republican Party was, I had made a commitment to Senator McCain, who has been a friend for 25 years, he and Cindy both, and have stood with me when I was the subject of a recall election that was engineered by social religious conservatives because I was gay. They stood with me and did not support the recall and supported my staying in office and so forth. And I had made a commitment to stay within the party through whatever road Senator McCain may end up. And we all know where that ended up last November. The morning after the November election in 2008, I filled out my registration form and switched. The Republican Party had other than John McCain and some very good friends, had left me a long time before that. And I was simply staying for loyalty and for friendship more than anything else. Yes?
In the back.
First off, I just want to thank you very much for coming out tonight. Really enjoyed your talk. It's more of a broad question, but the identity is something that throughout my whole life is something that's fascinated me, and how people develop identity and then how people operate within that. And then identity politics is kind of this whole other level of fascination for me. From, you know, Kennedy having to address his Catholicism to Obama and his race and that sort of thing. So I guess my question to you is how you as a politician identify that moment to say, you know what, I need to address this. Because it's probably very easy for Kennedy and Obama to be seen as a Catholic candidate or the black candidate or the gay candidate. And at what point you want to, how you make that decision to address an identity issue and not risk making that the center issue. Just love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And for me, I knew when I first ran for office that I was gay. And I also had made a decision that if anybody ever asked me, I wasn't going to lie about it. But I also did not want anyone to ask the question because I was still in Arizona and very nervous about it all. So when I was elected mayor for the first time, I got into the general election with another Republican. Some push polling was being done during that campaign, and not alleging that it was even my opponent that did that, for the record, but it was done. And the push poll said, who did you vote for in the primary? Oh, you voted for Neil. And then it immediately went to, did you know that he is single and does not have a family? The very next question was, it's likely a ballot initiative regarding the civil rights of homosexuals in Arizona will be on the ballot next year. Which way would you vote on that? The dots had really already been connected. I was in the closet from a technical sense, but it wasn't really a great secret, to the point where when I did finally come out, and I ended up acknowledging my sexual orientation publicly because some religious right folks in the community started coming to the city council meetings and in open session under public business started, you know, well, why does the city support the Lesbian Resource Project? Why does the city have a gay pride festival? And blah, 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 all these other sort of things. And one night, one of those individuals actually stood up there and said, and we know one of you, I'm the mayor presiding, and we know one of you leads this lifestyle, and you need to be exposed. And I just kind of did a big, "Oy," and the whole rest of the council were rolling their eyes. And this is on television. This is on local cable. And so I finally, you know, about a week after that, walked over to the newspaper editor's office, sat down, and I said, did you see the council meeting? He goes, yeah, I saw that, you know, great drama, huh? And I said, just write the story. And his response was, we can finally write the story? I said, yeah, just write the story, let's get it over with. Here's my statement. I'm not doing a press conference or anything, but here's my statement. Moving on. And so the lead paragraph in the paper the next morning was, you know, mayor says he's gay, and it was ending years of rumor and speculation. It was not a big secret. The council chambers had probably 500 people that night. My mom came. I mean, it was just, you know, all this more drama than we needed. But that's the way it unfolded for me. And actually, you know, my adversaries, there's a great lesson in this for those of you that are in this world. My adversaries thought they were going to destroy me. And they thought they were going to bring me down because then I'd be the gay Republican with her. It empowered me. It freed me and brought me deeper within the relationships that I already had, and people wanted to stand by me. When the recall election came about by some of these same folks a few years later, to a person, you know, all of my friends in high places in both parties, because as a nonpartisan elected mayor, I had great friends on both sides of the aisle. All of them supported me, and the recall folks couldn't find anyone to run against me. So for me, it was more about, it was great that they pushed me, you know, and I was crazy, insane at the time, thinking it was going to be the end. But the reality was it wasn't the end at all. It was actually a great, great thing.
Among the 4 national GLBT organizations you talked about, is there a formal coordinating or cooperating mechanism where you all meet on a routine basis, share information, strategy, et cetera?
Yes. Yeah, probably, I would say 3 or 4 times a year. All 28 or 29 are invited, and we sort of all get together. There's clearly a difference of level of activity and level of engagement, especially on the policy issues. And you have the whole 501c3, the non-political groups, and you have the 501c4 organizations that do all the political work. And by law, you know, it's not supposed to all be commingled, so we're very, very careful about all of that. But yes, 3 or 4 times a year, people get together, and you know, it's a bit of a dog and pony show, a bit of a show and tell. What's everybody doing? Here's what we're doing. How's it going? And it's very, very productive. I will tell you, having talked to people who were around before I was, when some of that was happening, but it was not happening as frequent, and you know, it all comes down to the individual relationships. The individual relationships are very positive, and people are supportive of each other. But you know, everybody also has their own board of directors, and everybody else has their own fundraising plan, and they have to raise money to pay their bills and keep their activists on their payroll employed. And so there's a bit of competition, but it's a friendly and work together competition.
What are your thoughts and feelings on this coming up, the National Equality March this weekend?
I support the march because I support any time people are willing to get together and take a stand. And I particularly support the march in the way it was put together, without going out and asking for a lot of resources and trying to take resources away from existing work that's being done, but rather trying to pull in new people to the movement and get all the young people, all the energy that exists within the younger demographic right now for the LGBT issues. It's very important for them. I think it's going to be transformative. I'm hearing this week that there could be somewhere between 100 and 200,000 people there, which I think would be tremendous. So I support it, and I'm glad that it's happening. At the same time, we have to realize how things work federally. We have a wonderful friend in the White House, but we have a wonderful, very smart friend politically. And he's looking at things in that regard, and he's going to make very calculated decisions with regard to advancing some of our issues, which we all would have liked to have been done by now. But, you know, that's quite honestly, to my friends in the movement who are upset about that, that was never reality. And I guess maybe having been an elected official, I see it a little differently. But that's, you know, I'm glad the march is taking place.
Let's go to the back right there.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm Sarah Lear, I'm a student here. You talked about the religious right and some organizations being obstacles, and I've worked with the Presbyterian Church extensively and worked with some groups that are pro-gay ordination. I just want to know if you, in your experience with GLAAD or otherwise, worked with religious organizations that were allies.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's been a transformative experience for those organizations and for those of us that were working in the movement. The start of the Religion, Faith, and Values program really was the opportunity to start talking to the collections of progressive people within all the major denominations. So you remember, I think it was the Lutheran group that was having their annual meeting. I forget what the term is that they use for their annual meeting, but they're having their annual meeting, and there was talk of some very anti-gay proposals, resolutions coming through their governance structure. And we were then helping the progressive group on the inside do some press releases about what they felt about them. The next thing you know, we realized that there were close to 60 to 70 ministers within the denomination that were ready to come out, that were ready to stand openly when they came forward and say, no, and here's why. You're talking about me. For the first time, they were going to do that. And it was transformative for that whole group, and some of those issues had to be shelved, and they had to change the whole dynamic of the meeting. So working with those allies is extremely, extremely supportive, and you know, helping people of faith talk in sound bites for the media. Most people of faith aren't very good at talking in sound bites. They like to talk. So we've done a lot of very high-level media trainings with amazing people high within their denominations who are allies of the communities to help them be better for talking about LGBT issues and giving them, the people of faith who are with us, they're with us from their heart, you know, because they just know it's right. And so we help them understand some of the facts and the information and where there is defamation still taking place and the impact of all that. And so we've kind of have a great partnership with them. Very proud of our Religion, Faith, and Values program.
I think we had a quick, yeah, right there.
Can we make a little bit more hay perhaps, of Obama's parents' marriage in terms of putting a face on marriage discrimination. His parents were married in one of 9 states in the District of Columbia that never had anti-miscegenation laws. So if he's such a friend to us, can we not use that to put more of a face on this and make this public?
That's been talked about, and GLAAD has not been in a decision-making situation about that, but when it comes to messaging about that, I understand that it's been looked at and it's been tested, and it's like you don't want to go there. For whatever reasons, it's just a very, very difficult thing. It's like talking about religious-based bigotry. It gets to be very personal. It has to be a very personal conversation. It has to be a conversation that allows for sitting down and deep conversation if you're going to really try to change people's hearts and minds on it. You can't mass media blast out a message about Obama's parents. Everything we know tells us that just won't work. Doesn't mean there's not people doing it, but yes.
You're right there.
As a brew baker guy,
yes.
Talk a little bit about strategy as it fits with marriage equality, or marriage and/or civil unions, and how you think about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are clearly some states right now where there's no need to take the fallback and compromise of civil unions. And there's clearly some states, in my view, and this is not shared by others in the movement necessarily, there's other states where we should go after and try to get civil unions. Especially in states, if some of the 20 states that don't already have a constitutional amendment banning marriage, go for civil unions. It is the incremental approach to policy change, and there are clearly folks who believe that we should never do that. Take nothing if you can't have it all, and there's clearly those of us who say, you know what, a good law that will help some people today and provide precedent and just help those people on a human level is something worth fighting for, even though it may not be the full thing. The organizations that are the marriage organizations, Freedom to Marry and Marriage Equality USA, probably have some differences even amongst themselves as to what the strategy should be. So it's really all over the board on a state-by-state basis. You have to remember, the federal government doesn't issue marriage licenses. The federal government recognizes the marriages that take place in states or counties and so forth. The city of Tempe doesn't issue marriage licenses. It's all county-based in Arizona. So the federal government simply has to recognize those. So the federal government has to do away with DOMA. The Defense of Marriage Act will prohibit the federal government from recognizing those marriages in Massachusetts, Vermont, and so forth. That's going to be a very, very tough thing to happen. I actually believe you probably need another half dozen to a dozen states to adopt full marriage equality before you're going to get a lot of traction on that on the federal level. As disappointing as that is, I don't mean to be negative, but I just think that's a reality right now. Others would stand here and vehemently disagree with me.
We have time for 2 more questions. We'll go to this guy in the back and you next.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Nathaniel Owen. I'm a Clinton School student as well. And I'm going to piggyback off Sarah's question a little bit, because I'm specifically interested in, you spoke very briefly about a shift, especially among younger evangelicals in their view of gay rights. Have you seen any signs of institutional support from any sections of evangelicals coming out to lend maybe subtly or very publicly support gay rights?
Right. Direct support, no. But we can tell you that they are using our issues less and less in their direct mail appeals to their supporters. Still happening, but of course we monitor that the same way they monitor ours. And they're using it less and less because they know it's not resonating as well. They know. I mean, look at the way the culture is treating us today. You have 12 million people watching a Grey's Anatomy top TV show or any of the other TV shows. Those shows actually are making people think. They're making people, they're seeing, like in that one, they're seeing a don't ask, don't tell story underlined. They're seeing the same-sex relationship. They're seeing the parent that is at first is, oh no, and then finally comes around a little bit. And so that's what's really helping people understand that, you know what, we probably need to rethink some of these things that we were thinking. So direct support, no, but a backing away, I would say a little bit. And that's, quite honestly, that's good. We'll take that.
Bill, could we get a mic to him in the back?
Could you talk about how you think that the inclusion of same-sex couples in the 2010 census will impact the movement?
Depends on how many people participate, of course. But I think any time that we're given the opportunity to be visible and be counted, it's incredibly important to do so. And so I hope everyone will go out of their way, even if you're not in a relationship, to try to find some way to self-identify throughout the census. I think that would be great to be able to do that, because those numbers matter. Yeah. I think it's another one of those things, though, that it's a policy issue that the outcome of it can be really good, or the outcome of it could be, oh, well, so you're really not talking about very many people anyway. Now, some would say, well, that doesn't matter how many people, but all those arguments then get woven into everything else that goes on, and we get off message when we have to do that.